Thank you, Daphne. I appreciate your support today and also the support of my colleague from ECIC, Nicole, who's here fielding all of your questions and anything that you might need tech related. Quick note, you may have seen this already on the screen, but I do want to remind you to just grab a couple of materials if you haven't already. You're going to need a couple blank pieces of paper and a tool for writing or drawing. You can do that digitally too, if that works best for you. Whatever you choose is perfect. And I want to share that although this is a presentation, it's built to be very interactive. So there are going to be a lot of opportunities to share feedback, like Daphne mentioned, primarily through the chat, but also in a couple of opportunities for breakout sessions. So again, we would love you to have your cameras on as much as possible. I love seeing all the faces that are here today, and I'm truly so grateful that you chose to be here in this session. You heard my introduction, which was a lot of information, but the things that I really, really want you to know about me, I'm going to share right now. As Daphne mentioned, my name is Brooke Albert. I'm a wife of 15 years and a mother of 3, and a passionate pursuer of peace and healing and justice in our world. Everything that I do and think about is deeply rooted and connected in those things. And so what I would love to do today is really just begin with some gratitude to thank you for being here, of course, on a Saturday morning when you could be doing a million other things, but also just for what you're doing in your family and in your community, just the leadership that you're living out every day as a parent, working to make sure that your children and all children and families can thrive. I really just need you to know that you're seen and valued, and I'm feeling so inspired after our keynote session and all of the great feedback that was going on. And I'm hoping that we can continue that in this session as well. And so thinking about that, I would love to just get a sense of who's here in the virtual space in the Zoom room with us today. And so I would like to invite you to share your name, something about your children. It could be the number of them, their ages, anything that you would like to share, and then one thing that you love to talk about. And while you're thinking of that and getting that typed into the chat, I already shared my name with you. Something about my children, I mentioned that I have 3 of them. My older 2 look a lot like me, and our youngest, who's a toddler, looks a lot like my husband. And it's just this really funny thing how 2 of our children and the other one look very, very different from each other. And then one thing that I love to talk about is my faith. I'm also deeply rooted and grounded in my faith, and I love talking about it and how it connects to my why and kind of my purpose for living. So I'm seeing some things come in through the chat. I look forward to seeing more. We have, okay, teenagers. My oldest is going to be 13 in about a month, and I'm just trying to buckle up for the ride since it's our first go around with the teenage years. And as those keep coming in, I invite you to take a look and look for folks in here that have some connections, some things that you might resonate with as they're sharing. To move us along, what I'd like to do is start to just create some shared understanding about our session today and kind of why we're here. And so our hope is that by the end of the session, we will have built relationships as parents who are advocating for change. And a quick note about the language that I'll use in our session. At ECIC, we refer to parents and families interchangeably. So the use of the word parent and family just refers to any adults who have a primary role in caring for a child. So that can include biological, adoptive, foster, step parents, grandparents, other caregiving relatives, and also legal and informal guardians. And that it can also include parents who maybe don't live with their child, but are still involved in raising their children and thus have really important perspectives to offer as a parent. So this is an inclusive environment where everyone is welcomed, regardless of what that role looks like. The next thing we hope is to explore how centering feelings and needs in communication upholds and honors human dignity, which we all know is something that is greatly needed in our world. And then lastly, we're going to have some time to practice providing feedback that does exactly that. And so I would like to share a little bit about my why. And as I'm doing that, I encourage you to think about your why, because in just a couple of minutes, we're going to head to breakout rooms and have a little bit of time to connect with each other in small groups and share that. So I'm here today because I believe that connection and learning are true pathways to healing and justice, and that those things happen in a really special way through storytelling, which, if we think about our keynote session, was a perfect example of that. When we are able to connect heart to heart, we become open to new possibilities as we embrace and hear and learn from the stories and lived experiences of others. We start to know different things, and then we can start to actually think about doing things differently. So I would love to have you think about your why. Why did you choose to take time out of a Saturday to be here? Think about that. We're going to connect around some community agreements, and then we'll head to breakouts. So in support of the outcomes that we're hoping for in the session today, I would just like to invite everybody to kind of hold some ways of being together for this short time that we're here. The first one is just to engage with warmth and care, just recognizing that we're all human beings here, that we don't know what everybody's morning looked like coming to this point, but that we're carrying all of those things into our space today, that we're humans with emotions. I can tell you that I'm excited, but I also feel nervous. Every time I have an opportunity, I feel some nervousness, wanting it to go well, wanting it to be a practical and useful time for everyone who chose to be here. The second one is to be fully present in mind and body and spirit, to really engage with your whole self as we're kind of diving into some of these things. And then the last one is just to take some risks. So be brave and vulnerable with yourself and with others. We talk about kind of reaching for that growing edge, which is maybe that edge just beyond where we feel most comfortable, because we know that that's in a space where we can really grow. As Daphne mentioned, we hope that you'll share your thoughts and the things that you're thinking about as you process this information and participate in the activities. And so thinking about that, these 3 community agreements, where you're at in this moment, which one of those stands out as especially important for you today? If you would type that in the chat. Maybe engaging with warmth and care is really resonating with you. Or maybe you have little ones in your space and other demands on your time and attention to where being fully present might be most resonating with you. Or maybe you want to take some risks today, and that might feel most resonating to you. Which one of those are you holding as important for you? I'm seeing engage with warmth and care and being present. Thank you, Karen. Engaging with warmth and care. That's the one I'm choosing today as well. All right, so I know that Dr. Angel touched on this a little bit in the keynote session, but the title of this session is Restorative Advocacy. But to talk about that in a meaningful way, we want to create shared understanding. So we're all talking about the same thing, right? And I'd love to learn a little bit about how this has shown up in your life as a parent. So I'd like to invite you to think about and throw into the chat answers to these 2 questions. What does it mean to you to advocate? Again, we've heard that word quite a bit already today. And then what are some ways that you currently do advocate as a parent? How do you see that showing up in your life? So what does it mean to you to advocate? And what are some ways that you're advocating or that you have advocated as a parent? I think for me, one of the things that really lifts in my experience is thinking about my children and their school, my son in particular. Some of his learning needs didn't always align well with how things were taught in school. And we had to really do some advocacy around that and kind of standing up for our son. Seeing that others have had some similar experiences with maybe the way that your children have learned. Thank you for sharing. And Daphne, you can feel free to call out and highlight some of the things that you're seeing in the chat as well.
Sure. So advocate meaning to support as an early childhood educator, advocating for the children and families in our programs. That was from Amanda. Heather says helping parents to gain and use resources in our community, exposure to the resources. Beth said my experience with my preemie son made me want to advocate for better public policies like paid leave, Medicaid expansion, etc. Speaking up on behalf of your child, asking questions, raising concerns, asking for help. It's also about teaching your child to speak up.
Mm. Thank you, everyone. There's so much wisdom in the feedback that's being shared. And speaking of feedback, that's what we're talking about, right? So when we think about what it means to advocate, and this lifted in so many of the perspectives that were shared, is that what it means to advocate and it always involves feedback, right? So for today, we're defining feedback as really any time that we share our views and perspectives, anytime that we offer advice or ideas or even criticism with the goal of seeing something improve or change, right? When we're talking about advocating, there's kind of this natural sense that something doesn't feel right, something isn't meeting my child's needs or the needs of our family in the way that we feel like it should and it needs to. And so then we need to advocate, right? We need to lift the things that we're seeing that need to improve and need to change. And that's what we're going to dive into a little bit right now. So what I'd like to invite you to do is think about these questions and again, share your answers in the chat. So thinking about when you get feedback, right? So let's start kind of in the personal here. How do you prefer to receive feedback from others? Someone, whether that's a spouse or partner, a friend, maybe something in your community, or even at work, perhaps, when someone comes to you and says, okay, so here's something I'm seeing that isn't working for me or that I think needs to change. I mentioned that we have a preteen daughter and we're having a lot of those conversations right now as she's learning to advocate for herself. What do you want that to feel like? When you're receiving feedback, what do you want it to feel like? If there was a fly on the wall, what would you want that to sound like? And what would you want that person to know in order for you to receive that feedback well? What would they need to know? So go ahead and start throwing that into the chat. When you're receiving feedback, what do you want it to feel like? What do you want it to sound like? And what do you want the person who's giving you feedback to know? And as you're thinking about that and getting those answers in, for me, I want it to be clear. If someone's going to come to me and ask me to make a change or to work with them on something, I want to really understand what that is and what needs to be changed and why. For me personally, that's really important for that to be a successful conversation or for us to be able to move forward together. So what about you? Detailed and sincere information. Yeah, if it's not clear, it's not helpful. And sincere, that word has come up a couple of times. Right? We want people to be genuine.
And Amanda says, in person and respectful. I want the person to know that I'm open to hear the information.
Thank you, Amanda.
Ramona says it can be a criticism, but isn't delivered in a mean-spirited way, in a loving, caring way, using a voice that is natural and sincere. Want them to know that if they love, care for me, they will let me know when I need to look at something or consider a change.
Thank you, Ramona. Yeah, so it sounds like there needs to be some level of connection there, right, for that conversation to go well. And I would say that that's absolutely true for me. I'm seeing in person, and I'm curious, I've heard that a couple of times too. So I'm thinking that in person would be maybe in contrast to something in writing or yeah, there's something different that happens when we're relating face to face versus via an email or something else or a text message. There can be miscommunications when we utilize that form for really important things like feedback. And I definitely appreciate that perspective. Yeah, I'm seeing that a lot. Accurate, genuine, respectful. And I think what we're seeing here in these responses is the reality that giving and receiving feedback can be super difficult on its own, but then we add in the complexity of what it means to just be human. So I'm curious, just by a show of hands or in the chat as well, how many have seen this iceberg model before? It can be used for a lot of different things, but I'm curious how familiar you are. I'm seeing some hands. Okay, it looks familiar to some. Yeah. So what, for our context today, This is illustrating the reality that for every single one of us, there's always stuff that's going on beneath the surface, right? So what we can see above the water is the person's behavior, the stuff that we're really tangibly able to kind of observe concretely. What we don't see is what's kind of under that water line. So sometimes we can see them and sometimes we can't, but right at that water line are a person's feelings and there can be many, right, that they might be experiencing. But even deeper below that are the unmet needs of a person that are ultimately driving their behavior. And I think sometimes we can apply that really easily thinking about the needs of children, but maybe not always as easily when we're talking about adults. And so many times, I know in my experience, when we're advocating and we're providing feedback strongly and passionately, to use Dr. Ron Howe's language, loudly, right, about the things that we know need to change, that can look like harmful behavior, unjust policies and practices, the reality of racism and oppression. It can be really easy to kind of get stuck on the behavior because that's what we're experiencing. And maybe even on the feelings, because sometimes those can maybe be a little ugly. But the humanity of what's happening can really get lost. But without centering that humanity, we will rarely, if ever, get to a place where collaboration and sustainable change can really happen. So one quick note that I want to share, because I think this is really important to consistently lift to the surface. Learning to kind of see behavior through the lens of understanding unmet needs doesn't justify or excuse or erase the existence of things that need to change. And I just have a really strong commitment to make sure that that's clear, because sometimes we act like those things are mutually exclusive, that if we seek to understand someone's needs, it somehow feels like it's justifying what's happened, and that's not at all what's true. What this does is really only support us in becoming more empathetic and more restorative people, which increases our effectiveness and our advocacy because it positions us to be able to reach and connect to someone's heart, which is where we know that those mindsets and belief are connected to, right? So we can use this model for self-reflection, asking ourselves what hidden unmet needs might be driving our behavior. And then, of course, for empathy building, engaging with curiosity to take some guesses, because that's all we are doing at the beginning, unless we've had a conversation, making some educated guesses at the needs and roots of another's behavior. Yeah, and David, I'm seeing your comment in the chat here that we might make an inference about a person or a group based on a very limited amount of information. That is such a great point. And from my perspective, why this can really be a helpful tool. I'm thinking about two different situations, maybe where something has happened. And in one situation, I might approach something by going right to a certain behavior or an act or something that I'm seeing that needs to improve or change. Where in another situation, if I'm trying to make a guess about what someone's feeling and ultimately what they're needing, because that's really the thing that's driving the rest, how someone might respond differently in those two situations. And then if I make an inference that might be incorrect, that they can correct me and share, because we've opened that door to begin to think about those things. Really appreciate that comment. So we're going to get really practical right now. What we are going to do is, in breakouts of about 4 to 5 people, we're going to just begin to explore making some educated guesses about what feelings and needs might be present in the situation, the scenario that you see on the slide. And to David's point, it's really important to remember that until we've developed a healthy way to communicate with someone directly about their behavior, we really are just making guesses about the feelings and needs at the root of the behavior. And so we want to make sure that we kind of remain curious and move away from quick reactive judgments or assumptions, right? That's where our biases live. but instead kind of take a step back and practice what you might know as type 2 thinking, which is a little bit slower and more intentional, and kind of more open-minded, opening up our thinking to become more concerned about a person's needs and what's driving their behavior. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to read this scenario out loud, and then I'm going to just take a brief pause for anybody who might be a non-auditory learner to read through it on your own in silence so that you can process the information. And then if you're going to do that, if you could type done in the chat when you're finished, but I'll begin by reading it first. Sophia is the mother of a newborn and 2 older children, a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. Both of her older children are in school, but around the time of their newborn's birth, Sophia's partner lost his job. He's been looking for work, but hasn't found anything yet. The family is struggling to pay rent and feed everyone. And lately, Sophia's older children have been showing up late to school because she's having a very hard time getting up to get them there. Mrs. Williams, her son's teacher, has noticed that he continues to show up late. She's worried about the time that he's missing at school and requests to have a meeting with Sophia. Sophia is scared that the teacher is going to report her to social services. So now I'll pause for about a minute and let folks read. Thank you. All right, I'm seeing a couple dones in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and move us to our next slide. So what we're going to do is paste that scenario in the chat. I can't have all this information on one slide so that you have it accessible when you head to your breakout rooms. But what we're going to do is I'm going to have you grab one of the pieces of blank paper, because this is where you're going to start to get some stuff out and go through this process. Now you can do this any number of ways. Whatever works best for your processing is perfect. You might oh, my little background. You can't see my paper, that's okay. You might draw 2 icebergs on your piece of paper and have them labeled with behavior, feelings, and needs like you see on the slide. You might be more of a list person. You might just have feelings and needs listed on your paper and begin to flesh some of that out. However you choose to do it is perfect. What's most important is that you make sure that you get through the feelings and the needs and have at least 2 listed for both of those categories, both for Sophia as the mom in this scenario, and then for Mrs. Williams as the teacher in this scenario. So on the slide, you'll see, and this slide will be shared to your breakout rooms, so you'll have this to support your thinking and brainstorming. A lot of us may or may not have been taught to really think about needs. We might have a pretty good pulse on feelings, but when it comes to needs, sometimes that can be really difficult to kind of pull out. So there's a list here to get you started. It's not exhaustive. It's just something to kind of get your brain going. So that's there for you as a resource as well. So using this slide as a group, you're going to brainstorm and make some guesses. You see the couple of behaviors that are labeled there for you. What might be some of Sophia's feelings that are leading to that behavior? What might be some of the unmet needs that are driving those feelings and ultimately driving that behavior? And you're going to do the same thing for Mrs. Williams as well. So what I would like to do really quick is just pause and see if there's any questions about what you'll be doing in your breakouts. Okay, I'm not seeing anything come through, but I'm going to keep my eye on that so that we can answer any questions. And the last thing I'll plug in there for you to get you ready for what we're going to do after the breakout rooms is what I'd like you to do is start thinking about it this way. Sophia feels this because she needs this. Start to make that connection between the feelings and the needs, and the same for Mrs. Williams. Mrs. Williams feels blank because she needs blank, and we're going to move into that part of it when we come back from breakout rooms. So Nicole is going to get us started. The scenario is in the chat for you again, and I think I'll be able to broadcast that as well in case someone wasn't able to grab it. And I'm going to share this slide into your breakouts. So if everyone's ready, Nicole will let us know when she's going to open those.
Brooke, just confirming we're still doing 10 minutes, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
We're going to do 10 minutes.
All right, perfect. And it seemed like last time some folks had some issues. If you don't automatically move to the room or you have any issues, feel free to unmute or put in the chat and we'll try to help you get connected. But I'm opening them all now.
Okay, and sometimes when we get the prompt, we might accidentally leave the session. I know I've done that before too. So it might take a minute for folks who accidentally left the session to join back into the room. But for those of you who are here, I would love to hear what you came up with. And I know that for the good of the group, it would be great to see. So in the chat, curious, what were some of the feelings that you all brainstormed that Sophia and Mrs. Williams might be feeling? Seeing empathy. What are some of the things that Sophia, as the mom in this situation, what might she have been feeling? Overwhelmed? Hopeless? In my own brainstorming, that was one of the exact words that I also chose was hopeless, overwhelmed, stressed. Yeah, this family has so much going on, right? Can relate. Stressed, definitely, definitely. What about the needs? And sometimes those are a little bit harder to nail down. What about the needs that Sophia has as a person, right? As a human being, what are some of the unmet needs that might be there that are leading to those feelings of stress and overwhelm and hopelessness? Yeah, Sophia, she might need to have someone else support her. So thinking about that particular, maybe we could call that a behavior, choosing to see a therapist could be related to a need for support or understanding. What are some other needs that you identified? And maybe some came from the list. For me, I use the word support.
I think too, I'm sorry, support, stability, security. She needs that people help her because she's without job. She needs money to keep in her house. And I think that respect, security, stability, support to her, food.
Yes, basic needs. Thank you so much for sharing and for unmuting. That is welcome as well. And I should have been more clear that you have the freedom to do that. Thank you. Yes. What about Mrs. Williams, the teacher? What are some of the feelings that you could gather that she was feeling from the scenario? Thinking about Sophia's son and him missing school and being late every day. What were some of the feelings that you brainstormed for Mrs. Williams? Worried, concerned? Absolutely. That felt pretty clear because she needed to understand. Maybe an unmet need for Mrs. Williams is a need to kind of understand what's happening with this family so that maybe they could provide some help. Yeah, Heather, same. Yeah, that was a word that I chose as well. Thank you all for sharing. What we're going to do in these last 10 minutes of our time together is really start to bring this home. So what I would love to invite you to do is think about a time that you experienced a situation that was challenging. It could look like the situation that we brainstormed together, or it could be something different. You might already have something that has come to your mind as a result of walking through this. It could be a misunderstanding, just difficult circumstances in some kind of relationship, an experience of someone causing harm. And so what I'm going to invite you to do is using the iceberg model on the next slide, which has feelings and needs as a list to get you started. You're going to, as an individual, have some reflection time with a little bit of music playing. We're going to use probably about 3 minutes, and you are going to do this for yourself and for one other person who is part of that. There might have been more than one person, but choose one. You're going to identify the feelings and needs that were present for you in that situation, and then also for the other person that was in that situation, and fill in the sentence frame that you can see here on the slide. I felt, and fill it in with one blank because I needed, and then fill it in with another blank, and then do that for the other person that you chose as part of that scenario. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to paste the sentence frame into the chat so you have it there visible when I go to the next slide. And there's going to be some blanks here. And the blanks are for you to fill in. So I'm going to go to the next slide. And we're going to take about 3 minutes, and you can use your other blank piece of paper or whatever tools you have to fill in these sentence frames based on the feelings and needs that you brainstorm for yourself and for the one other person that was part of that situation. So I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions about what we're going to do for the next 3 minutes. Okay, great. I'm going to go ahead and begin the music. And quick reminder that the volume of this music is going to be controlled by the volume on your device. And we'll see you back in the 3 minutes. You're welcome to turn your camera off if that would be helpful for you to process. And we'll get started. All right, I'm going to gently call you back to our space. 3 minutes flies by really quickly. And what I would love to invite you to do in these last few minutes that we have together is, if you're willing to, share your sentence frames in the chat, because there is a lot of power in the stories that we tell. And what I want to kind of close with is question. Okay, so how does this connect? Why is this important? And the reason that it's important is because to be effective advocates, we have to hold two realities that are often in tension with one another, but still equally valid and equally true, which is my needs and the needs of another person. And so to be effective advocates, it's important to remember that everybody's needs matter. And if we don't manage these tensions well, they will have a tendency to pull us apart from other people rather than creating opportunities for connection. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dr. Fania Davis. She's an incredible racial justice advocate, as well as restorative justice. And in one of her books, the little book of Race and Restorative Justice, she talks about this role of advocacy kind of having two sides of one coin. And on one side, we're warriors for justice, but on the other side of that, we're also healers of humanity. And both of those things are important in working for justice. And one way that we uphold both of those tensions together is by following a model like this, right? By upholding the dignity of every single person, by centering their feelings and needs in our minds as much as we do our own. So if you're willing, if you would fill in your sentence frame, I felt blank because I needed blank relating to your situation, and this other person felt blank because they needed blank. You might notice in this graphic that the arrows are turned toward one another, and that's because when we center feelings and needs in our thoughts, in our communication, in our feedback, as we speak strongly and clearly about the things that we need to see change, we create opportunities for connection, shared understanding, and true collaboration for moving forward. And one of the last things I want to share, just in my own personal work, I just have a commitment to acknowledge the reality of racism and all of the other isms that exist in our society and just perpetuate inequity. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge that biases really do impact a lot of the way that we feel. It's real, it's there, it's a true thing. And that's exactly why this is such a powerful tool for our own reflection and for helping us see past another person's feelings to their needs as a human being. One of the greatest temptations that I face in our fight for justice is stripping away the humanity of others who might not agree with my feedback or who might even be actively working against the change that I want to see. But we're all human, and I have to constantly remind myself of that and force myself to look into the faces of people who have caused harm and answer the question, do I really believe that their needs matter too? And then maybe even more, do I want to learn about what those needs actually might be and be a part of meeting them? And again, it doesn't justify or excuse or erase the real harm that continues to happen as a result of inequity and oppression and marginalization. But what it does do is prompt us to live the change that we fight for, which is that the needs of all people, regardless of race, place, identity, are heard and seen and met while upholding the individual dignity and worth of all human beings. And it's not always easy, and we won't always want to do it, but it is possible, and it is a key to becoming a more restorative person and advocating more effectively and more restoratively. So with that, as we say goodbye in the next minute or so, how I'd love to close is just by inviting you to use one word to describe how it felt to participate in the activities and what we walked through today. Now, one word prompts can be really challenging for some of us who might like to use more words, but I want to gently push us all to our growing edge and just clarify that one word isn't meant to be the entire description of how you feel or what you experienced. It's just one word that's coming to your mind right now in this moment. And I would love to thank you for choosing this session and for choosing to be here today. And I would love to just wish you well with all the care in my heart. And I truly do look forward to continuing our fight together as we work to ensure that communities, all communities, are places where families and children can truly thrive. So thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. I hope that I can see you again throughout the rest of our time together today, and I hope that you enjoy the rest of the conference.